What if the real shock of 2026 isn't what's coming, but what's already here? Because right now, this very moment, the world is shifting faster than most people can process. Not next year, not in 10 years. Now, look closely and you'll feel it. Inflation didn't vanish. It just changed shape. Global debt didn't cool off. It climbed to the highest level humanity has ever recorded. Populations aren't growing. They're aging faster than any government planned for. And AI isn't rising slowly. It's exploding upward, outrunning the laws and institutions built to contain it by a decade or more. The US and China aren't moving toward a Cold War. They're already deep in one, competing across chips, trade routes, energy, and influence. Currencies aren't stable anchors. They're losing trust. And resources, everything from energy to minerals to data, are tightening like a closing fist. Most people can't explain it, but they can feel it. A quiet pressure, a sense that something massive is shifting beneath their feet. And here's the part almost no one realizes. These aren't random events. They're echoes, patterns, ripples from long cycles set in motion decades or even centuries ago. 2026 isn't when the chaos begins. It's when the underlying model finally reaches its fracture point. The moment when the hidden structure of the world stops being hidden. And we're forced to see that the change wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. Why everything feels like it's breaking at the same time. By the time 2026 arrives, the world doesn't just feel tense, the numbers prove it. Global debt, the total amount governments, businesses, and households owe worldwide has stretched far beyond anything history has seen. According to the Institute of International Finance, global debt jumped from about 213 trillion in 2015 to around 318 trillion by the end of 2024, an increase of nearly 50% in a decade, outpacing the growth of the entire global economy. That means we owe far more than we produce in a year, and that gap keeps widening. It's like trying to sprint while lugging a backpack that's getting heavier every step, and the weight doesn't suddenly disappear when you think you're moving forward. The deeper the debt, the tighter the squeeze, and nobody knows how to shrug it off. Without consequences, you'll see why in a moment. Take the United States, for example. What was once a talking point in economics textbooks is now a lived reality. As of late 2025, U.S. federal debt has climbed to over 38 trillion, the fastest pace of accumulation outside of the pandemic period. Just 2 months after passing $37 trillion, the total surged again, fueled by rising social spending, interest costs, and budget deficits. That's a number so large it's hard to picture, but its effects aren't abstract. Higher debt means higher interest costs, slower wage growth, and a government that is more sensitive to each economic shock. And when one country's debt shakes, the reverberations ripple through the financial system. With numbers like this, the world isn't teetering, it's leaning toward a structural shift we haven't fully grasped yet. But it's not just debt twisting the screws. The energy systems powering the world are under unprecedented stress too. AI and data centers are consuming electricity faster than planners ever expected. In the US alone, power demand from data centers, a rough proxy for AI energy use, has increased sharply year after year, with projections showing consumption reaching over 250 terawatt hours by 2026. That's not a steady rise, it's a surge that strains grids and pushes investment toward new infrastructure. All while total energy investment worldwide hits record levels over $3.3 trillion in 2025, led by clean energy projects that still can't fully meet demand. And with copper, a critical metal for electrical infrastructure, climbing roughly 35% in price due to tight supply and surging demand from AI and energy shifts, the squeeze becomes tangible in raw materials too. Meanwhile, everyday people feel the effects in subtle but real ways. A headline inflation rate might look calm in some countries, but the cost of housing, electricity, healthcare, and everyday essentials tells a different story. one where families feel the pressure long before reports reflect it. And as governments and central banks wrestle with these competing forces, debt, energy demand, inflation, growth, the signs of strain aren't isolated, they're systemic. At first glance, these tensions might look like separate problems, but when debt, energy, technology, and everyday costs all squeeze at once, it feels like the whole world is humming under pressure. And that's exactly what a system on the brink of structural change sounds like, because you don't just see a shift. You feel it everywhere you look. We've been here before history just runs in circles. It's almost eerie how the past repeats not in the details, but in the architecture. When you trace the last 500 years of empire history, 2026 stops looking like an accident and starts looking like a sequel. You can see the pattern take shape as far back as 1776, when the United States emerged in the middle of war, debt crises, collapsing trust, and a British power structure cracking under its own weight. Currency was losing value, society was fracturing, and the old order couldn't hold. That entire birth and rebellion phase stretched on for roughly 40 years, carving the identity of a new empire out of chaos. Today, 2026 feels strangely similar, but instead of standing at the beginning of that arc, we're standing near the end of one. Move forward to the 1860s, and you find the world entering another structural reset. The American Civil War tears the country in half. Britain's dominance slips. Europe simmers with revolutions. And all of it unfolds under the shadow of a technological force, steam power, rewiring economies, and militaries so quickly that the old financial systems can't keep up. New tech, major conflict, power redistributed. Old institutions made obsolete not by politics, but by speed, what the steam engine was to the 1860s. AI is to 2026 a multiplier that takes every tension in society and pushes it toward the breaking point faster than the system can adapt. Then comes the 1930 to 1945 cycle, the one that mirrors our world the closest. A global economic downturn shakes the foundations of every major nation. Currencies become weapons. Societies split between young generations hungry for opportunity and older generations clinging to stability. New technologies, radio, radar. Nuclear breakthroughs reshape warfare and information at a terrifying pace. Meanwhile, the map of global power is rewritten step by step. If this timeline is a script, then 1937 is the scene right before the world falls into its most volatile chapter. And in the long arc of history, 2026 sits in that same position, standing on the edge of an inflection point the world can sense but not yet name. Finally, the 1970 to 1980 era delivers the modern template for monetary fracture. When the U.S. abandons the gold standard, the dollar is reinvented. Inflation surges across continents. The Cold War tightens. Oil becomes a pressure valve for global power. Public trust collapses. It's a decade defined by instability, but also by transition. Today, the echoes are unmistakable: the rise of cryptocurrencies, the emergence of CBDCs, fading confidence in the U.S. dollar, and a new kind of energy conflict centered not on oil barrels, but on data centers, transmission grids, and compute power. If the 1970s broke the old monetary regime, then 2026 is the version built for the digital century. Across all these timelines, the same mechanism keeps resurfacing: a cycle where economic strain feeds social fracture, where social fracture invites political conflict, where political conflict accelerates technological disruption, and where disruption finally forces a redistribution of global power. It's not fate, and it's not a conspiracy. It's the way large systems breathe, expanding, contracting, reorganizing. Every empire goes through it. Every era is pulled into it. And 2026 is not the exception. It's the next inevitable step in a very old pattern. The moment before a new world emerges from the bones of the old one. The real reasons behind the chaos you're seeing. If you zoom out far enough, the chaos of 2026 stops looking random and starts looking engineered. Engineered not by governments or corporations, but by time itself. Every pressure point we're living through sits inside a larger structure, a web of long cycles that turn whether anyone acknowledges them or not. The first of these cycles stretches roughly 80 years. The rhythm at which institutions quietly fail. You can see its beats like rings on a tree trunk, the 1780s, when new nations rose from the ruins of old empires, the 1860s, when the United States tore itself apart, the 1940s, when the world had to rebuild every major institution from scratch, and the 2020s, when trusting governments, media, banks, and public systems sinks faster than at any point in 8 decades. By 2026, this erosion will happen so quickly that people can feel it but can't stop it. Because institutional decay isn't a scandal. It's a cycle completing its loop. Layered on top of that is the long-term debt cycle, the 50 to 75-year heartbeat of the global economy. Debt accumulates slowly, quietly, invisibly, until the numbers no longer fit inside the system holding them. At that point, every nation faces the same menu of bad choices: print more money, devalue the currency, restructure obligations, or rewrite the rules entirely. And in 2026, with global debt climbing past $300 trillion, the world isn't deciding whether it will reset, but how painful the reset will be. Anyone who's ever stretched a rubber band too far knows the outcome. The snap isn't a surprise. The tension is the warning. Then comes the technological supercycle, the 40 to 50-year waves of innovation that don't just create new industries, but rewrite the operating system of civilization itself. Steam in the 1800s, railroads around the 1850s, electricity at the turn of the 1900s, nuclear power in the 1950s, the internet in the 2000s, and now AI, data-driven infrastructure, and energy systems in the 2020s. Each time this cycle turns, the world changes shape. Old winners fall behind. New winners appear out of nowhere. And every structure built for the previous era starts to creak. By 2026, AI hits its inflection point. It stops being a tool and becomes a force multiplier, accelerating every other cycle already in motion. Running parallel to that is the 40 to 50-year currency cycle, the pattern that keeps repeating from 1944 to 1971 to 2000, and now to 2026. These years mark the moments when the dollar isn't discarded, but reinvented, when the world quietly shifts from one monetary order to the next. In this phase, the signs are unmistakable: the U.S. dollar losing relative dominance, new monetary blocks forming, and an undeniable push toward a multipolar system of settlement. People talk about cryptocurrencies and CBDCs as if they're trends, but in reality they're symptoms flares revealing that the current monetary structure no longer fits the world built on top of it. And beneath all of this, the deepest, slowest, most unforgiving rhythm is the 250-year imperial cycle. From 1776 to 2026 stretched a quarter millennium, the typical lifespan of a dominant power. Every empire follows the same arc: rise, peak, overreach, stagnation, decline, and then a painful rebalancing. The United States is no exception. By 2026, the pattern aligns almost too perfectly: a system that has moved through expansion, through global leadership, through overextension, and now sits at the edge where decline transitions into reconfiguration. It's not collapsing. It's not doom. It's the point where the old architecture must bend or break. Put together, These cycles form a kind of hidden machinery, 5 gears turning at different speeds but locked to the same axis. When one moves, the others adjust. But when all 5 align, the world doesn't just shift, it fractures. That's what 2026 represents, the moment when every long-term cycle reaches a pressure peak, pressing on the present from different directions until the system has no choice but to transform. Not because leaders decide it, not because crises demand it, but because the underlying structure has run out of runway, and the next era is already waiting on the other side. This is the year all the pressure finally shows. Every long cycle has a moment where pressure stops building and begins to crack the surface. That's what 2026 feels like, the year when the invisible lines finally intersect. You can almost hear the sound of it, like metal bending before it snaps. The first fracture shows up in energy. AI, growing faster than any forecast dared to admit, demands electricity at nearly 10 times the original estimates. Clean energy can't scale fast enough. Grids strain, governments scramble. And in the vacuum, the Middle East continues to hold the lever on global oil, turning a commodity into a choke point. It isn't sabotage. It's geometry. When demand outpaces supply, tension becomes structural, and structural tension always spills into conflict, whether military, economic, or political. The next crack runs through demographics. For the first time in 5,000 years, entire nations see their populations shrink. Not gently, sharply. Fewer workers, fewer taxpayers, fewer young people to support aging societies with rising social costs. It's the kind of slow-motion decline that looks harmless year to year, but becomes irreversible once the slope turns downward. A shrinking population is like a fire running out of oxygen. It doesn't explode. It suffocates, and when labor becomes scarce, every plan built on endless growth begins to collapse under its own weight. Then the monetary fault line begins to widen. The imperial dollar is still strong, but no longer absolute. That shift alone is enough to reshape global behavior. Central bank digital currencies rise, not because they are better, but because the world is searching for alternatives. Confidence in banks weakens, and the entire system feels like a house standing on a cracked foundation, still upright, but no longer stable. Currency regimes don't change because people want them to. They change because trust evaporates faster than institutions can respond. Technology adds its own violent twist to the arc. AI no longer waits for regulation, because it can't. It grows beyond the reach of legal frameworks written for another century. In this environment, AI mixes with weapons, mixes with economic power, mixes with political strategy, and suddenly, the balance of the world tilts. Not from war, but from acceleration. When technology outruns laws by a decade, the world stops being governed by rules and starts being governed by momentum. Across the map, another break opens between the United States and China. Neither wants a direct conflict, neither benefits from it. But the cycle of power doesn't care about preference. It forces the two largest nations into a contest they can't walk away from, competing in technology, supply chains, energy, currency, and military influence. It's not a fight for territory. It's a fight for who gets to write the script of the future. And by 2026, the competition stops operating in the shadows. It becomes the defining axis of global reality. But the deepest fracture isn't economic or geopolitical. It's social. Wealth gaps widen to the point where they feel like different worlds living side by side. Frustration spreads. The belief in a better tomorrow, the fuel that powered generations, fades. And when optimism disappears, societies don't crumble immediately. They shift. They behave differently. People withdraw trust, energy, and ambition. It's the psychological version of a power outage. 1 second the lights are on. The next, everything is dark. Put all these breaks together: energy shortages, demographic decline, monetary uncertainty, runaway technology, geopolitical rivalry, social distrust, and they form a single picture. A system under maximum strain. A moment where every long cycle converges at the same point in time. Not a coincidence, but a mechanical result of forces that have been building for decades. 2026 is the hinge year, the bend in the road, the place where the future stops being a continuation of the past and starts becoming something entirely different. The old world is fading, and the new one isn't ready yet. 2026 isn't the catastrophe everyone fears, it's something far stranger. It's the year the old world quietly stops working, and the new world isn't ready to take its place. Not a crisis, not a war, not a recession, not a mass AI takeover. It's a threshold, a hinge, a doorway between eras. For 40 years, the global economy ran on a single blueprint: cheap labor, cheap energy, cheap money, and global integration. By 2026, that entire model reaches the end of its lifespan. Growth doesn't collapse, it stalls, as if the engine is still running, but no longer connected to the wheels. The United States reaches the late stages of its long imperial cycle. The phase where power doesn't disappear overnight, but slowly shifts. Like weight transferring across a cracking bridge. China enters its own restructuring cycle, hit by demographic decline and economic pressure that force it to transform from the inside out. Europe isn't falling, it's freezing, locked into a long, slow crisis that drains momentum without triggering dramatic change. Meanwhile, AI, for all its promise, creates a new kind of imbalance. Productivity skyrockets. But the labor structure it disrupts can't adapt quickly enough. Entire systems, education, employment, regulation feel like software written for hardware that no longer exists. Social trust sinks to levels the modern world has never seen. People don't just distrust institutions, they distrust the future itself. And when the future stops feeling like an upgrade, societies behave differently. They protect. They retreat. They fracture. Resources turn strategic. Not just oil or gas, but electricity, data centers, rare minerals, anything that can power AI and the infrastructure around it. What used to be commodities become pressure points, bargaining chips, vulnerabilities, and in the background, currencies shift into a new era. Not a collapse of the dollar, but a transformation of the entire monetary environment, a slow descent into a world where no single currency anchors the system, and where CBDCs rise because the old architecture can't support itself anymore. Put all of this together, and 2026 becomes the intersection of two forces moving in opposite directions. The old model, economic, political, social, can no longer function under its own rules. But the new model, technological, demographic, monetary, hasn't formed a stable shape yet. It's like standing in a house where the lights flicker. The floor tilts, and the walls groan, not because the structure is collapsing, but because it's shifting into a new position. History has a name for this moment. It calls it the fracture phase, the period when the past can't continue, and the future can't begin, leaving the world suspended in a tension that feels both dangerous and inevitable. It's the kind of moment where civilizations don't break, they transform. But transformation always starts with a crack, and in 2026 that crack finally becomes visible. When everything changes, which side will you stand on? No one can say with certainty what the world will look like on the other side of this fracture. But history is clear about one thing: when an old model breaks, the outcome isn't determined by the blueprint of the new system, it's determined by the people who step forward to shape it. Every era of transformation begins this way, with a moment where the past loses its grip and the future hasn't yet taken form. 2020. 26 is that moment. A point where cycles collide, institutions strain, currencies shift, and technology outruns the structures built to contain it. And in times like these, the question that matters most isn't about prediction, it's about position, about agency, about responsibility, because when the world reorganizes itself, everyone ends up standing somewhere either as someone carried by the change or someone carving the direction it moves. So the question isn't abstract, it's personal. When the model breaks, which side of history will you choose to stand on?